Hello, my name's Tyler York. I work for Grantu, which is a plug-and-play platform for multiplayer for mobile games. Hey, it's Ken.
Woo! Oh yeah, you need a beer. Everybody has a beer. You're late to the party, literally.
Uh, yeah, I actually used to write about free-to-play gaming a lot for a company called Bettable, which is a real money gambling platform. So I'm intimately familiar with the ethics of gaming and gambling, which should be interesting. Here, why don't you go?
Oh, I'm up?
Yeah, you're up.
I haven't even had a sip of my beer yet. Okay, that's better. Hi, I'm Ken Murphy. I'm Vice President of the studios at Gamehouse. Responsible for our mobile social activities, which includes a couple of apps in the social casino space and our soon-to-be released brand new version of Slingo Adventure, we're really excited about. I was desperately wishing on my flight down that was 3 hours delayed that there was some form of microtransaction-based in-game boost that could speed the game up, because I certainly would have converted. But no such opportunity. Really looking forward to today's discussion, though. It's been a really interesting one to prepare for, and so should be great.
Hi everyone, my name is Lisa Marino. I'm the CEO of RockU. I've been in the gaming space and ads for way too long for anybody to possibly remember. I am probably the biggest proponent in the room of the ultimate unholy alliance in free-to-play, which is which is user monetization through video and advertising. With that,
Hey everyone, my name is Mike Liu. I'm the Vice President of Product at Gree. Gree is a global company that's headquartered in Japan. We generate, I think, $3 billion in revenue last year, and a public company at that. And our focus is on mobile games, as well as now into new ventures of mobile applications. Our most recent one in Japan was essentially a hotel booking last minute. But here in the US, our focus is really on first-party development as well as second-party publishing.
Hi, I'm Nolan Mittal. Sorry, it's a little loud. I most recently was Director of Business Development at InMobi, the best ad network, as you all know, on the planet. And so I led adoption of our native advertising platform, right? So I think a lot of the discussion here revolves around, my in-app purchases versus advertising, because nobody likes ads, and I think it's really been, we didn't have the right ad formats, we didn't have the right way to integrate ads into these experiences, and I think now we're evolving that experience.
Can anybody? Oh, there I am again. Okay, great. So I actually want to. What? You're good, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to start the conversation deep right into ethics. Gaming as an addiction. So 2010, China passed a law to protect children from being on the internet too often. Children were dying while they were in rehab centers for internet addiction. So given that we are in a world of social casinos and a pending world of legalizing online gambling, I want to hear about what the panel thinks about those things.
Wow. That conversation just got really dark, really, really fast. I'm not sure I can follow up that dark comment about children dying. Yeah, that's not good. And when it comes to gaming addictions, I think that's a pretty serious topic. And as it stretches into mobile gaming, I think we're sort of in the lighter side of that, mainly because a lot of mechanics prohibits the player from playing more than maybe 5 to 10 minute sessions at a time. And the engagement for these games are much shorter as well, specifically around how long they're playing. And most mobile players don't tend to play that long anyway. So we don't really have that trouble of like that addictive nature. But again, I think the topic we're probably going to really talk about is how the gambling aspect come into it. And I'll let my colleagues speak more to that.
Yeah, so I think online gambling is obviously propagating. It's already Nevada and New Jersey, right? You can do online gambling. It's only a matter of time. I think we're just going to see a lot of regulation come into the play across all of these games, right, as they integrate gambling. Because once you have in-app purchases, it's not a stretch to start weaving those gambling experiences into these things. I personally think the best place to start in all of this is just transparency and kind of being very clear about the kind of purchases are inside of your app, even the kind of ad formats, videos, what's inside this game. And I think that's just a good start to kind of, understanding and figuring out what to do next.
So one of our titles is a sweepstakes game, which is a very sort of middle ground between the free-to-play, the classic free-to-play model, and online gambling. And in a sweepstakes-driven title, as the guys at Slingo know, you can actually win real money and real prizes. And so every day in our bingo game, every 4 minutes we complete a bingo round. And in that round, there is a slight percentage chance that somebody can win $1,500, $2,000, $10,000, whatever the prize is. And from our perspective, we're very big fans of this model, largely because it is free to play. And one of the core components of the sweepstakes experience is allowing users to participate without having to pay. And so there are many different ways to earn sweepstakes entries in our title that are very compelling game mechanics. I wouldn't call them addictive, but they allow for a very high-end user experience and allows these players, mainly moms, to engage in something that's very exciting with lots of instant gratification at the end, because maybe you didn't win $1,500, but you won $2 or $1, and that allows you to get more sweepstakes entries. But again, just like every classic sweepstakes model, so think about McDonald's Monopoly, you walk in, you don't even need to order a cheeseburger. You can go and ask for your Monopoly chips. They're required to give you some. They do, and maybe you win, maybe you don't, maybe you win a cheeseburger. It really just depends on what chips they give you. And so that experience and that gaming experience is very compelling. But from an addictive perspective, I would say it is very transparent, and it allows users to participate, again, without draining their pocketbooks.
Well, so for me personally, I mean, when I was in high school, I played World of Warcraft, and so for me, I was very much addicted to that game, and it didn't even have free-to-play mechanics. I really feel like the kind of crux of the question is, if we feel like games are addictive, even a little bit, is it our responsibility, is it the government's responsibility, and to, say, regulate it, or at least sort of what limits do you put on it? And it's interesting because in a sort of parallel example is like taxis and Uber. Taxis, government regulated, and it's kind of a mess. The medallion system is a mess. Uber, they are not regulated, but they self-regulate. So I think it's interesting that right now, like, free-to-play gaming has this opportunity where there's no regulation on it, but people are looking at it. And there are mechanics that you could call addictive or not. And so the question is sort of, where do you draw the line? Do we do it ourselves so that the sort of heavy hand of the government doesn't do it for us?
Okay, great. I just thought I'd give it a shot so we'd have more mics up here. But look, I think the numbers in this situation tend to speak a little bit for themselves, and I know we're going to get into this part of the discussion in a moment. Games from the beginning of history are built and designed to have certain components of them that entice people to continue to play, that touch on some of the same emotional drivers that compel people to keep going. Does that cross the line into addiction? I'm no expert on addiction. I'm not even going to begin to try to make a judgment on that. What I will say is that, perhaps even segueing into our next discussion, in an environment where the vast majority of players that are enjoying these games are not monetizing on an ongoing basis, I'm hard pressed to be able to point to an addiction, a massive addiction problem that we have. People can get addicted to lots and lots of things. And as an industry, of course, we have to be aware of that. And as a society, I agree with you. We have to determine who's responsible for helping to control all of that. But in my personal opinion, I haven't seen the evidence and the data to say we've got a massive addiction problem in the free-to-play gaming space.
frankly, so frankly, I think we've got a much bigger problem with YouTube and addiction than we do with gaming and addiction. My son is 9 years old, and he probably watches. He doesn't watch TV anymore. All he watches are his YouTube channels. And so I think across the board, all of this digital entertainment, it is up to me as a parent to regulate. It is up to us as individuals to regulate. And whether it's a monetizable event through an in-app purchase or something free like YouTube, it doesn't really matter, right? It's all very engaging and available and on-demand digital entertainment consumption.
So what about all of our usage of data, right? So suddenly we're able to identify the historical behavior of these users while they're playing our games, and I'll be the first one to confess that I use that data to make decisions about products.
Absolutely.
And those behaviors really represent the personalities of those different users. So from a responsibility perspective and an ethic perspective, how does that data play in?
Well, so the purpose, in my opinion, of building a game and playing a game as a consumer is to have a experience that you enjoy. And so understanding how the players behave, whether you're using it for a monetization event or just pure retention, I think provides much more benefit than it's potentially taking away. At the end of the day, having a game with, a 10% second day retention rate isn't going to do anybody any good. That game's not going to last very long, and clearly users aren't enjoying it. And so creating an experience that people want to continue to return to is what this is all about, whether they pay or not.
Yeah, I think what you said is very much right. I think it's very much about your mindset in approaching that, right? Like, are you doing this for enjoyment, for money? I mean, it can be for both, right? Like, we all have to make a living here. But I think definitely if you have the mindset when you're approaching it that you're trying to make the best game or the best product, it's obviously not like an evil thing to do.
It's not the evil empire?
Yeah, it's not the evil empire.
Does this work? Yes? So I think, the KPIs are users, engagement, downloads. Enough engagement. I don't know the clinical definition of addiction, but if you have people playing a game 2 hours a day, they're probably getting addicted to it, right? And I think we're optimizing for that. We're trying to do that, right? So I think we're fooling ourselves if we're saying we're not trying to get people addicted to games. Whether we're saying that's a positive experience for people, like they truly enjoy it, or whether they're so addicted that they can't help but to play this game. So I think we're game developers, app developers aren't going to be good at self-regulating this stuff. I mean, our alignment is to make them more addictive. If you think about the Uber example, the regulation is aligned with their business success, right? So, of course, they're going to regulate and do that. Here, I don't know if it is. Those are just my thoughts.
Yeah, I'm going to come from more of the game maker side. For us, like as game makers, like we want to provide entertainment to our people. Like we want to create something fun, something that, take all of the insecurities out of ourselves and create an escapism for ours and also for our audience. And that's something that's an art form that, yes, it makes money. Yes, it can cause addiction. But at the end of the core, like people who are making games, that's really the original intent. It's entertainment, right? It's a musician writing a song. It's a movie director creating a movie. It's a game designer creating an experience for you. So is there some moral dilemma that we have to face? I'm sure there's some responsibility out there, but that is by nowhere the intent. We're not a tobacco company. We're not an alcohol company. And, my favorite company recently, they call themselves Super Mega Evil Corp, which is like a gaming startup. And that's an amazing name because that's not who we are, right? We make games. We're nerds. We're the guys who play Dungeons and Dragons, that are making games. And I don't think we're inherently evil, so.
Agreed.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I agree completely. And sure, absolutely, it's our job as game makers to make something incredibly enjoyable, to make something that people want to keep coming back and playing day after day, time after time. And I think it's easy for us to focus on the dark side of what can happen with any enjoyable activity where things can go a little bit too far. And I'm sure everybody in the room, I have as well, have some activity where ultimately I've regretted how much time I've spent on it, or how much money I've spent on it, or how much my attention it's taken away from my family. But I did it out of the fact that I was really enjoying the experience. And yeah, we're a part of that. But I think that we kind of have to look at the sunny side of all of this, which is for millions and millions and millions of people, this is an enjoyable diversion for them. It's a way to spend a little bit of time during their way. It's a way to have some fun and get away. And I think that's the preponderance of the experience for most people, both consumers and developers in the space.
Okay. So let's take a turn. So we're creating this positive experience for these users as an escape, right? And we're all talking about ads in games. And so there's kind of a twofold of a question. One is, how do we think these ads are impacting engagement? And how do they kind of reflect the quality of our product? And then two is, as an industry, have we really cracked the code on monetization yet? Is that really all there is, in-app purchases and ads?
So a couple things. I think the answer you get on ads may vary greatly across this panel. And and there's a very specific reason for that. If you look at Mike and his games at Gree, they're very male-centric. They're very, very high monetizing from an ARPU perspective. The ad component doesn't add a lot. But when you're dealing with Rocky's games, they're all on Facebook. We've purchased 12 games in the last 8 months. And the overwhelming demographic we have are moms. And 2%, maybe 1.5% of our moms pay every day, and 98% don't. And when you give them mechanics that allow them to experience the game as a payer, and make no mistake about it, any game I play, I am a payer. But that's a great perspective to have, because when we build ad engagement and game mechanics around ad engagement, it's very much to mimic that payer experience, but in a way that engages brands and in a way that is opt-in for every player that's out there. And so from my perspective, it really just depends on who you're serving as your core customer base. But for us, every one of RockU's titles does 40% of its revenue from ads and 60% from digital goods. Mike looks very different. Gamehouse is going to look a lot more like RockU, given the Slingo titles that they have, and many of the other real titles. And so it really just depends on the platform and the audience you're serving.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Look, here's the trick, I think, with ads in general, right? I mean, I'm sure everybody in the room just loves to have their favorite film interrupted with an advertisement, as they're watching it. Beyond the fact that it gives you a chance to get up and get some popcorn or whatever, and especially seeing the same ad that really annoys you time after time, right? There's no real pleasure in that. If we're talking about the aesthetics, about what it does to the experience, I'll be the first to say I don't believe that there's a scenario in which it can really be made additive. There's a scenario in which people can understand the value exchange, that can understand that they need to be able to support this form of monetization in order to keep the game that they enjoy so much to be vital, just like we all understand that when we watch television, we get the way that the game is built. But the challenge is, of course, that we're right now in a portion or a stage in our industry with a free-to-play model where advertising, with the exception of folks like Lisa's team, there's not a lot of advertising monetization that's going on out there. We are very focused on the experience. In fact, I can speak for Gamehouse when I say we shied away from it. We have a strong history as a company of being very heavily involved in advertising. We shied away from it just to make sure that we were focused on the experiential elements. And so it is an aesthetic challenge to be able to figure out, does that democratization of monetization outweigh the impacts that it has on the game experience to players?
Well, I definitely... Is this on? There we go. I definitely like what Lisa said, where letting players have some agency and choice in the matter really does help a lot. For instance, like in what's it called, Disco Zoo by Nimblebit. Like I watched those Vungle ads all the time because you would get 5 extra turns, and that was like totally worth it to me. And I ended up getting some games that I saw in those ads, and I was like, okay, this works. I think also in general, as advertising on mobile matures a little bit, I mean, if you look at where online advertising now is, it's only really starting to catch up sort of functionality-wise to like television today. So mobile's got a long way to go. And I do think that it is possible to have additive advertising experiences. One of the ones that I personally am invested in is like essentially in-game sponsorship, in-game items. I think all stuff like that, a lot of it, if done correctly, can be really interesting. A game company that I know, Hutch Games, they have a monster truck racing game called MMX Racing that just came out, and they have a Monster Energy branded truck, and it totally fits. Like, you don't even really think about it. So it is possible.
Actually, that's a great anecdote. So one of my favorite stories, when I started at Rocky, I used to run the brand sales team. And my friend Bridget here in the front row sold a campaign in Zoo World to Coca-Cola. And in Zoo, it's a collector's game, right? It's very much of a Dollhouser type experience. And we sold over 3 million Coke vending machines for people to place in their zoo. The campaign stopped running about 4 years ago, and Coke still gets hundreds of thousands of impressions per day because there's no way you're going to take someone's Coke vending machine out of their zoo, because that is part of their zoo experience, and you don't mess with that. I mean, that's like complete sacrilege. And so there are, whenever we integrated brands into our gaming experiences, those were the days where we saw huge jumps in engagement, huge jumps in sharing, huge jumps in every type of non-monetization metric that matters to us in that gaming environment.
I think, so if we talk about how advertising has traditionally been done up to this point and what it's going to look like over the next 5-10 years, I think up till now, we haven't had the ability to innovate on the ad format, right? It's been, here's a banner, put it in your app. And now, InMobi, Facebook are giving you APIs to take these ads and weave them into your experience how you see fit, to certain with certain limits. I think as we do that, we'll see really strong experiences and integrations. Like you're talking about the vending machines, the various brand integrations. I think when you put the power in the hand of the developer and you have an API for this stuff, you're going to see a lot of innovation. Like we haven't even started innovating. This is like day one of innovating on ad formats. So I think we will see a lot better experiences, and it's going to be up to the developer community here to kind of mold those. But to say that, advertising doesn't really work and it probably won't work in the future, I think is short-sighted.
So we have a question up here. Go ahead.
I'd like to hear all four of their opinions. I already know yours, so maybe end with yours. But from an additive experience for a user, aside from product placement or some kind of custom integration with the game, I'd like to hear your opinion on, especially given some of the new regulations around incentivized, but around like a reward where you watch a video and you're rewarded with some kind of in-game meta currency, where that's highly additive from the player's perspective. So I'd like to hear from people, developers who may not adopt that or may choose not to for a specific reason, what that reason might be.
So, very quick version of that question is about incentivized ads that users watch, or they take a certain action, and as a result, they're rewarded virtual currency or virtual item that really enhances their gameplay.
Basically gives the player a payer experience that Lisa was alluding to. Tell that 98% is like a
Yeah, I agree completely that those types of value exchanges make a lot more sense to players, right? They, particularly in an environment where they are exposed to the relative cost of obtaining that item through another means. So the ability to say, hey, look, I can look at a $19 bundle of coins, and then instead of that, I realize, wow, I can watch 5 advertisements here or do something like that and get that same value. That makes perfect sense to players, I think, to be able to go down that path. In many of these cases, though, I think one of the interesting questions is, well, actually, let me get to my other point on what this does to the experience and to retention after everybody answers that question.
Okay, sure. Yeah, so interestingly, I think that there are actually a lot of creative ways to reward players, not even just in like a one-to-one exchange. One of the things that we're looking at actually is doing sponsored tournaments and having the sponsors put up prizes that people can win by just being the best people in the tournament. And that doesn't look like a reward directly, right? But it actually, the more people engage, the more people actually are getting, the brand is getting the value out of them and vice versa. So I think there's a lot of creative ways that you can approach essentially rewarding players for interacting with brands. Yeah.
Yeah, so I can give the more like I guess game specific ones. So for our gamers, like there's always this sort of translation layer they have to do to translate the cost of say a tank that costs 100 gold in the game. Like, what does that really mean? When you have advertisement that tie into like real world products, such as like for a Netflix subscription, we'll give you 100 gold, or for signing up with Disney like something, we'll give you 100 gold. That actually breaks the barrier of like what is actually virtual and what is real a little bit more, so that players understand the real sort of price point value comparison of this digital good, and makes, in fact, reinforces just how valuable certain things are. So when that 100 gold tank suddenly comes down to 10 gold, it's a 90% off. Players will definitely jump on that because they believe it's 90% off in this virtual sort of marketplace. So having that like correlation is sometimes very helpful, but from an ad perspective, like I think there's no problems adding that. In fact, I think ad networks and technology is smart enough to know that we generally want to eliminate spenders from ever seeing an ad, and especially to the point where if a spender hasn't spent in your game past 7 days, chances of him spending again goes down to zero, like as close to zero as possible. So those are hard metrics that we've seen time and time again. And at the end of the day, we're a business. We have to make money somehow. And if we know they're going to play your game and they're never going to spend money, we still have to stay and maintain the studio and hopefully make another game that people will enjoy.
Yeah, so I think incentivized video is definitely a win for the consumer. Very used to that ad format from television, et cetera. Watching, taking a break, if put in the right place in the game after a turn, after you just died, whatever it is. I think for the brand advertisers or the app download guys, it's great as well. I think for the developer is the sweet spot that we're not solving for yet, because as you were saying, like if you think about a video and you even put it at a $10 CPM, what's that? That's 1,000 views. So each view is a penny, right? So for a penny, you're giving the user an extra 3 turns, whatever it might be, or charging them $1 probably doesn't equal out, but hopefully we can figure that out over time.
So absolutely agree that it doesn't always equal out, but you've got, so speaking from the payer mentality, right?
Yep.
In any of these titles, I don't pay, I don't necessarily do the math to say, oh God, if I watch, 20 videos, and this is typical Rocky experience, I can watch 20 videos and get the same thing as if I pay $3 or $4. That equation doesn't necessarily net out, but there's no way in hell I am going to spend the time to watch 20 videos. I'll spend $5 or $2 or whatever, but I've got a snack time in my game of 5 to 7 minutes. If I have to use it, and I can do that 4 or 5 times a day, or maybe 7 or 8 times a day. But if I have to consume all that time with watching videos, that's not a good experience for me. Others have a very different play style, right? Where they can be in longer, they can spend that time, but that's not me, and that's not generally the payer mentality.
Right. I agree with you. I think there's those 2 different sets of users, right? There's probably more subsets, but my point was, I think the game developers have to get so let me back up a little bit. The data that we're using to kind of make decisions around product, et cetera, I think that same data can be used to deliver better ads, right? Or more relevant ads. And as that happens and eCPMs go up, then I think it becomes a lot more exciting for the game developer to show these things than it might be now, I guess was my point.
Actually, my question is, what are some
For the user, it's great.
they're just knowing that they're getting a payer experience. So I'm a little more curious as to what prohibitors from the developer side, given the fact that yes, it might only equate to a penny now, but assuming you have a sticky game and you have a strong, sustainable user base over time, like an investment that grows and grows and grows and grows.
Well, I mean, personally, I've found that sort of where we've hit sort of a temporary ceiling on like the growth of mobile advertising spending, and it's not even really a ceiling; it's just growth has slowed a little bit. Is because it's almost entirely dominated by apps paying for other apps, and there's no essentially impression or brand advertising. And it's because they don't really see return on it. So I think whatever format unlocks that is going to be very powerful.
So I don't actually agree that it's the. I actually think it's more of a tech issue. We lived in the exact same world in gaming when Mike was at RockU, where things like VAST and VPaid and the basic standards that allowed programmatic to scale as effectively as it had weren't available at that time. We used to have to sell every campaign direct. We used to have to run it out of our own ad server, right? In the case of mobile today, you've got Vungle, needing the MP4, needing to run that through their ad server. So brands will enter when they can start buying like they do in other venues and in other media. That is happening aggressively. We spend a lot of time on that as a company. But I think you're going to start to see a big lift in brands in Q4, and next year it will definitely start to outpace the CPI side of things. Because a game goes negative ARB. I mean, come on, we've all been there. In mobile, a game goes negative ARB 3 months, 4 months maybe, unless you've got something super, super high ARPU. We all read the stories about Candy Crush being negative ARB long before they stopped curtailing the ad spend on that title, and that's just what happens.
Ken will respond, and then there's a bunch of questions. I want to give them opportunity. Oh, all right.
I do.
Yeah, we do.
So with Facebook login, you can actually grab people who are mothers, who have kids, who are less than the age of 4, or, various data on the users. So why aren't the gaming companies making it more of a priority, even from a PR perspective, to say our games are less addicting and we show certain things to users who should be spending times with their kids, but their session time per day is 8+ hours, right? Why aren't we doing things like that to actually curtail some of these issues that we're seeing, and which could ultimately reduce the regulation in your industry in the long term?
That's a very interesting question. I think it comes back to sort of what we were talking about earlier with it's like, should we attempt to regulate ourselves? If so, how? The tricky part is that first you have to admit that we need to regulate ourselves, and I think that's going to be the tough sell, right? Because as soon as you start saying our games are less addictive than what? And then, well, what's the other guy? Is he more addictive? And so I think no one's gone down that road, in part because it's kind of no one wants to touch it. And yeah, when it comes to, I mean, Lauren talked earlier about you can start to segment by player behavior and maybe pick out addictive players. I think there are things we can do, but I don't ever think we're going to advertise games as this game is less addictive, just because of sort of the PR implications.
I was curious in terms of, you mentioned non-paying customers with ads. How about you have other experiences or success stories in extracting value from your non-paying customers besides just getting ad revenue from them in terms of virality or other?
Absolutely. So you've got a couple core pillars of any gaming experience, right? Monetization is just one, but when a user hits a block of some sort, it could be they run out of energy, it could be they haven't, they're stopped in terms of completing their building. You've got a couple tried and true loops that will work. One is you can throw money at the problem as the player. The next is you can, invite your friends. Most of the Zynga games are great with that mechanic, right? Engage 20 friends and you get to complete this building. And you are able to, within the community environment, find out who's active in that game from the message boards and reach out to them and friend them, and you guys create this web of players who help each other regularly experience these games more like a pair would. The social experience, the viral experience, and then monetization are key components. And then there's just flat out grinding. A lot of things can be solved with time. And if you're patient and you wait, I mean, in a lot of Mike's games, you've got a choice. You can pay now to get the tank you want, or you can wait until 24 hours from now, come back, and it'll be ready for you. And so there's generally 3 ways to get what you want in any gaming environment.
Yeah, so from the game side, I'll definitely add to that because the non-spenders are actually really, really important to the health of the game, especially in a competitive game. If you look at the top 3 or top 5 grossing, a game like Game of War, which has been consistently in top 3, which is valued at $3 billion right now, according to the Wall Street Journal, that's a purely competitive game. And not all of their players spend. So if you subtract or don't value any of those spenders, you'll just end up with maybe 100 or 1,000 or that's it, right? But it's having the ecosystem of a game that makes it successful, right? Like the spenders want to be top 1 of 100,000, and probably 90,000 of those are non-spenders, right? And if that goes from top 1 of 100 people, that becomes less, motivating or less fun for the player. So yeah, it's just less competitive. So absolutely, having players is ultimately very important to the ecosystem of your game, regardless if they pay or not. The ones that do pay, they're better, I guess.
Hi guys, a question on the monetization of addiction. Obviously addiction's a big deal, but when you add the unlimited spend to it, it becomes a bigger deal. Could you go through each of you, your apps, and just say, if a customer reaches out and says, can I turn off my spending? How many of you, your customer service team knows how to do that or offers that service? I'd just be curious of a show of hands of who does that and who doesn't.
Yeah, absolutely. We get a customer that calls up and says, look, I don't want to spend any more. We can turn that off. We have turned that off. We've had occasions where we've had people ask for refunds because, maybe somebody in their family got carried away. All those kinds of things are just good ethical best practices when they come up.
Very specifically in our bingo title, because it's sweepstakes driven, we limit the amount of sweepstakes entries somebody can earn in any given month because we are very specifically preventing that problem. And so I think in our bingo title, it's about 2,500 entries per month, and after that, you can't play anymore. So you've got a series of users, and you'll see our monetization curves, and you'll see our player engagement change from the beginning of the month to the end, because when the month is over and you start the next month, all these people reset because they've maxed out. And somewhere between the 3rd and the 4th week, you see this barrage of people maxing out on that 2,500 number. But we try to be very responsible around how we treat players and make sure that we're not putting something in there that allows for, that allows for something that's uncapped.
Yeah, I mean, in Japan, this is actually a common law. All the billing goes through carriers, and in fact, it was instituted as a law, I think, in 2012 that the carriers can charge a game or can bill anyone for more than $500 in a game. So it did become a problem there where people were spending tons of money, and the government actually enforced this upon the carriers to actually set a limit. Again, this is just one example of it. Here, it hasn't really become much of a problem, but it has happened. It has worked, and I don't think that's a problem for anyone here sitting here.
Can we let her talk? And who has the microphone right here?
Yeah, hi. I just wanted to ask more about premium currency. So I know that some people have said premium currency can kind of obscure how much players are spending, and so some people are on the fence about premium currency. And I was just wondering, do you think it is possible to build a top-grossing freemium game, free-to-play game, whatever, without premium currency, or is it an essential part of the monetization?
I think it's a pretty essential part of it, mainly because it allows the game developers also to give out those premium currency as rewards for doing like missions, quests, etc. If we don't have that, we can't really give dollars out to the actual player. So that removes an entire game dynamic that is actually really prevalent in all the games, and it's very rewarding for the players as well, to that they know they can earn premium dollars themselves by just waiting or doing certain things. They would never be able to do that if we didn't have it.
Sorry for speaking out of turn. Apologize for that. My question, because it is about ethics, and I've been wondering a lot about this, is what's the best practice in self-regulating for daily spend limits or monthly spend limits? I understand what you talked about in terms of you can only enter the sweepstakes 2,500 times, which seems like a lot, but I'm not judging. But on the spend side, I'm not hearing maybe we only let people spend $1,000 a month, or I don't know, some number that you guys feel okay about.
That's a very interesting question, and I think it's kind of the crux of the sort of self-regulation debate, right? Because again, if you only have 2% of people spending a large chunk of money, you kind of live off those people, but to what extent? I think that unfortunately it's really hard to find a one-size-fits-all solution, so you really have to decide what's best for your game. I think Lisa has some thoughts.
So I think we're not actually asking the right question. And for me, let's go back to my YouTube example with my son, right? I am much more concerned that he spends 4 hours a day watching YouTube and what that does to his social skills, what that does to his brain power, what that does to a variety of things, than I am if he spent $5 a day in a game. If he spent $5 a day in a game, that is something that I can control, that is something that I can shut down, that is something that I as a responsible parent can do a variety of things about. My bigger concern in all of this gaming, and the addiction definition we're not talking about, is the amount of time these people spend in the game rather than the amount of money they spend. And we've got people in our bingo title who may max out at 2,500 sweepstakes a month, but they're not playing very long. They're playing big, right? They're in the high roller room. They're spending money quickly. It's the ladies who are playing 8 hours a day and their primary mode of engagement is the chat room in bingo. They don't spend a dime, but they're in there for 8 hours a day. I think that's far more damaging and far more challenging and far more addictive than the woman who comes in for half hour, 45 minutes a day and maxes out her sweepstakes entries because she's playing big. But that's just me.
Can you? Oh, yeah, there we go. Sorry. So in terms of if you look at a casino, right? They don't want you to know what time of day it is. They don't want you to know where the doors are. They don't want to give you any sort of biofeedback as to where you are, what you're doing. You've just talked about setting a limit and knowing where those limits are. Have you guys thought about putting in-game monitoring in terms of how much you've spent or how much time you've actually been in the product, so the user can actually check and self-evaluate and self-monitor their usage? It's not really a use case for the majority of users. It's for that isolated set of users that do have this problem not monitoring time or spending.
I think that's a good idea, and that is, we as gamers, that is a responsible way to self-regulate while still putting the onus on the user to be responsible themselves, right? A degenerate compulsive gambler at the casino, you're not going to see the win haul him out after he's lost 100 grand. Can we agree on that? You may get the guy in the pit saying, you've lost 100 grand, you might want to think about stopping, but make no mistake about it, if that guy's got a marker for another 100 grand, he's spending whatever he wants. And so I think your idea is a good one. Haven't necessarily thought about that, but there are users in these experiences who just don't know how to self-regulate. And I don't want to be their parent. I don't want to be the one to force them to do that. That's not my job. But putting tools in place to allow them to do that for themselves is helpful.
So, I mean, there are a couple games that I've never seen anyone do it on the spending side, but I've definitely seen games do different things on the time side. And sometimes it really helps, like in Hearthstone, the World of Warcraft Hearthstone, they have the clock in the corner. And so you can see what time it is. You can be like, it's 2 a.m. and I need to go to sleep. So, I mean, little things like that are good. But I definitely agree with Lisa that it's really up to the player. However, providing at least a little bit of feedback, I think, is a good idea.
So I just wanted to ask a clarifying question. I know you talked about how setting a limit in bingo isn't nearly as bad as, the 4 or 5 hours a day someone is spending. What do you guys use as the benchmark to say what's bad and what's good, and how do you decide, like, what is that 2,500 number coming from, right? Who's deciding that that's the right limit?
So the 2,500 we decided when we built the game. It really hasn't changed. We haven't asked a ton of questions about whether that should be lower or higher or whatever. We find that most people don't hit it, which is the right answer, and there are some that do, and they're the people for whom it probably needs to hit, right? For me, the time in game, that's just a personal judgment. I am a person who thinks having a diverse set of interests is positive, that engaging with other humans is something that we're beginning to not do very much anymore and is probably good for society in general. So when you're in a chat room for 8 hours, that's probably, my own opinion, a little bit less effective. And so, from that, but that's just my own opinion, right? There's no math per se in our games that says so-and-so spends 4 hours, that's bad.
It also has to be from perspective that 2,500 number comes from every 4 minutes of sweepstakes is being run. So it sounds like a large number.
Well, yeah. So to follow up on that, is there someone within your organizations that's responsible for thinking about ethics or researching what that accurate number might be? Or time limit or anything like that? Is there someone within the organization that's thinking about that?
I'm going to agree with Lisa on this, that, I think we've taken the approach justifiably and rightly that I don't want to be these people's parents. We do watch it. We've had some players, and we're in a situation where we've had a couple of players that have spent a fair amount of money, and what we've done in those situations is that we've made sure we've understood who these people are. We've reached out to them. We've talked to them. We've made sure that we have a dialogue and a conversation with them. We make sure that they're doing this willingly. We make sure they're aware of how much time they've spent in the game. This is a very, very fringe group of people. Yes. And it's easy to get in touch with this group of people. For the vast majority of play activity on any of our games, and I'd probably say this is true of the industry overall, this thing that we talk about as a problem for 98% of our players is a nice little pastime that they spend a few minutes on every day.
And we do the same thing as it relates to people who spend a lot of money. We had someone spend $20,000 in a month on one of our games. And we reached out to that person, and we did, in fact, limit what he could do because it was just too excessive. And so these guys are such outliers. And literally, we probably see maybe 10 or 12 of them a month across 15 games that are just really excessive. But we know how to reach them. We do. We make sure that they are... We ask the questions to make sure that they know what they're doing. But at the end of the day, I'm not their mom.
Yeah. I think what you're asking is really more of a dilemma of the current generation. Like, not so much just in games, but like, is there a moral obligation that things like Facebook has, right? Like, think about how much time people are spending on Facebook, and do they have an obligation to kind of correct that or make that a better place or for the betterment of mankind is really what we're talking about. Like, and things like that are popping all over the place. Is there, I don't know if you guys are familiar, but there's an app called Secret where people can post anonymously about anything, right? And it's bad. And it's pretty bad. Like, does that company have a moral obligation to police itself, right? Like, that's an open question that I don't think is easy for anyone to answer, not even definitely for other people up here.
I think Tinder's another great one, right?
Tinder.
I mean, I've got friends who are literally on Tinder 2 hours a day. And if you're like looking for dates that much, wow. So
do all of these companies have their own moral obligations to police themselves? Like, the obvious answer is no, but like, I think there is a line, right? Like, I think Secret is a great example where they are trying. They're trying to police it. They're trying to like tailor it so that it's not negative, it's not hurtful to other people. But at the end of the day, it's just not easy.
So I think we're going to have to wrap this conversation up. Thank you, everyone, for the great questions. And if you want to talk to the panelists about this more, I'm sure they will be at the bar outside. So they'd be happy to talk with you about it. Thanks for coming.